That brings my query into the field of biotechnology. Could you share some of your thoughts on biotechnology in general and genetic tool development for wildlife conservation application, in particular in Nepal?
I think there's a huge amount of there's so much prospects for this kind of research and these kinds of applications. Some of the things that I've learned from talking with you is there, currently there hasn't been a lot of studies and research done on things like disease prevalence and things like that, and diagnostics that you all are working on and you're very successful at. So there's a great opportunity to bring in biotechnology into Nepal and to develop these resources that can be used, for health applications, including disease diagnostics, things like possibly screening for certain genetic defects or disorders. There's also, things that can be done in environmental type of studies, looking at possible pathogens or bacterial, disease organisms in the environment, such as in water contamination, or soil contaminants, food contaminants. So that's that one aspect of it. Then there's another aspect where biotechnology it has great applications for animal husbandry, for veterinary kind of stuff. And then thirdly, there's a lot of there's this overflow. So, in terms of genetics and biotechnology, most of the developments are, of course, in health and human-related stuff, because that's where the money is. But all these techniques and developments that are made, they can then be in turn used for wildlife applications. And so one of the reasons that I was very excited to be in Nepal is of the incredible ecological and biological diversity here. I've been actually wanted to come here for a long time, so I want to thank you for the opportunity. There's everything from lowland forest and, all the way up to high altitude Himalayas, of course, the rooftop of the world. And so there's a great ecological diversity within a very short distance, geographic distance. And so, there's a lot of diversity here that's very unique, and there's a lot of unique ecological communities. And in order to, develop, basically effective conservation initiatives, one of the first things people need is information about these communities and about the species. And so right now, we're sort of poised where we can actually use these genetic techniques and these advances in biotechnology, to get a really nice understanding of the wildlife and the, plant diversity within Nepal, to ensure that there's information on, for example, which species are under high risk of going into extinction, what populations of these species may be isolated or fragmented, or their population size. So, for example, the tigers that we have discussed recently are isolated. They appear to be in small patches. They're fairly small. And so, how the demographics play out, which of these populations are connected, and if, for example, if some populations are suffer a higher mortality rate due to poaching or maybe lack of prey, is there the likelihood that individuals from another population are going to migrate into that area and sort of replace those individuals? So there's actually two different kinds of applications that I see for biotechnology. One is sort of a strictly kind of a population status, abundance sort of estimator, right? So where you can see, look at not only population size but population trends, and so genetics provides a very good tool for that, using like those non-invasive surveys, and particularly for snow leopards. And then the second aspect where some of these genetic techniques are going to become very important for wildlife in Nepal is to see what's useful with genetics is you can get a look at the entire population. And so the patterns of genetic variation are very strongly influenced by population demography, so connectivity, fluctuations in population size, effective population size, social structure. So by looking at genetic variation, we can get a good understanding of the connectivity of the landscape and how animals are moving through the landscape, if there's corridors there, and, how particular barriers such as high altitude passes may disrupt movement between different areas or isolated areas. There's another good example is snow leopards. I guess it was about in the 70s, 80s, kind of disappeared from the Sigamartha National Park, and since then they have recolonized that area. And so, if we have a good sampling of the populations in that area, we can sort of predict, where those snow leopards are coming from. And these can be, so therefore we can identify source populations, and, those source populations would be critical for conservation purposes because they're the ones that, are very important to preserve, because they can ensure the status and the persistence of these species.
So Jan, it certainly sounds like there are a lot of prospects with this new genetic tool, and really, I mean, this is an upcoming field in terms of how you look at wildlife and the conservation part of it, right? And so, what kind of collaboration and common efforts do you think there can be for U.S. researchers here?
I think there's a lot of different prospects for collaborations. I think that there's a lot of people that are very interested here in wildlife and that are also dedicated to conserving the species. And so in the U.S., there's a lot of expertise there, and however, there's also a lot of Nepali researchers that have, like yourself, that have spent a lot of time in the U.S. and have made contact, and there's that have come back here to work, and so there's basically a good interplay of ideas. I've even noted this in the last week that I spent in your lab, where there's a lot of difficulties that come about with non-invasive genetics and those techniques. And so, you and some of the technicians have had ideas that I didn't really think of, when we're doing some of these lab methods. And so there's, I think what kind of comes in is the sharing of ideas. And so it's really critical to develop large collaborative projects for wildlife, particularly because, wildlife species they're not restricted to boundaries of countries. Right. And so that's one aspect. So there's, in a particular research team, there has to be, for particular wildlife, there has to be a section that deals with sampling, right? And then there has to be a section that deals with, the actual, for example, lab analysis and study design, and also, the interpretation of data, and then trying to develop some kind of goal that would be achieved, or trying to have a broader picture where you're not doing a research project just for the sense of getting data out of it, but something that would have information or provide information for conservation and kind of help our understanding of the broader picture of that ecological community. And I think there's a lot of interest of U.S. researchers working in Nepal. And I think this is actually would provide a lot of very positive interactions and development. And the other aspect is, of course, funding, for example. So there's there would be a lot of potential to develop collaborative projects where there's maybe counterpart work done in the U.S. or that both U.S. researchers may be working in Nepal, but also Nepali researchers going and working, spending time in the U.S. and working on projects there, and basically have a more interaction like that.
Yeah, that certainly is the case. I mean, we have different stakeholders in terms of wildlife conservation. You're talking about conservation biologists. You have behavioral scientists, and then you have policymakers. You have law enforcement. And you have the genetic part of it, which is a new tool, of course. So all of them needs to be well communicated, and we're talking globally in terms of conservation because, like you said, there's no boundary for these animals. There's no geopolitical boundaries that they follow. So in that context, I think it is a much more of a global kind of interaction and collaboration, and I think that's what we should do. And on the lighter note, so what impressed you the most? What surprised you the most? and when you come back next, what would you say to your friends in the U.S. when you go back about Nepal?
I guess what impressed me the most is how well you deal with the power outages.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're used to it.
And actually the most shocking thing to me, it wasn't, I guess, shock, is actually how your hospitality, because I've spent a lot of time in, Mongolia and China, and when I worked with some of those people, I'd come in the lab and, I'd work for during the day there, and then I would kind of go back to the hotel, and they would leave me to fend for myself pretty much. And I just felt very welcome here, which I think is something I'm going to take back. So I think what I'm going to tell my friends is the good friendships I made here, and that I'm going to definitely, as soon as possible, come back. And what I hope to see is some of the mountains and some of those ecosystems that we mentioned, and maybe even Chitwan and some of the areas where those tigers are.
And thank you so much for your kind words about Nepal and people of Nepal. And we hope to see more of your involvement in the projects and different wildlife conservation projects, and of course with the genetics part of it. And I'd like to thank you for your time today. I hope you have a safe journey back to the U.S. and I hope to see you again.
Thank you, Divesh. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I hope to come back soon.
Good. Take care.